The rain fell heavily over the tiny village of Akambi village, washing mud through the narrow roads and beating against the weak roofs of old houses. In one of the poorest corners of the village stood a crooked little hut made of wood and rusted metal sheets. Smoke escaped through the broken roof while thunder growled in the dark sky. Inside the hut, a thin girl no older than 18 knelt beside a pile of dirty clothes. Her name was Ada. Her hands were red from cold water. Her stomach ached from hunger. But she kept washing. "Move faster," a sharp voice shouted from the other side of the room. Ada quickly lowered her eyes. Her Aunt Mom Nkechi stood near the doorway with her arms folded tightly across her chest. Her face carried the permanent bitterness of someone who enjoyed seeing others suffer. "The market women will arrive soon," Mom Nkechi snapped. "If those clothes are not dry before sunrise, you will sleep outside tonight." Ada nodded softly. "Yes, Auntie." No matter how obedient she was, it was never enough. Ever since her parents died in a terrible fever when she was only 7 years old, she had lived under Mom Nkechi's roof like a servant instead of family. The villagers knew it. But nobody spoke. Because Mom Nkechi was feared. And Ada was invisible. She cooked. She cleaned. She carried heavy buckets from the river every morning. She sold vegetables in the market under the burning sun while her cousins sat comfortably at home. Sometimes, when food was scarce, Mom Nkechi fed everyone except Ada. On those nights, the girl would quietly drink water and pretend she was not hungry. Yet despite everything, there was something strange about Ada. She never became cruel. Even after years of suffering. Even after years of humiliation. Her kindness remained alive. Every morning before sunrise, she secretly left small portions of food near the village church for abandoned children. She helped elderly women carry baskets. She cared for wounded animals. And every night, before sleeping beside the kitchen fire, she whispered the same prayer. "God, please let tomorrow hurt less than today." But tomorrow often hurt more. The next morning, Ada hurried toward the river carrying 2 heavy buckets. The road was slippery from the rain. Women gathered near the riverbank washing clothes and gossiping loudly. As Ada approached, a group of girls began whispering. "Look at her dress," one laughed. "She wears the same torn clothes every week. I heard her aunt treats her like a dog." Maybe because that is what she is. The girls burst into cruel laughter. Ada kept walking. She had learned long ago that silence hurt less than fighting back. But the words still pierced her heart. She bent down beside the river and quietly filled her buckets. Suddenly, she heard a weak cry. Not far away, a small boy had slipped near the deep side of the river. People screamed. The child struggled violently in the water. Without thinking, Ada dropped her buckets and jumped into the river. The current was strong. Cold water pulled against her body. But she forced herself forward. The boy disappeared beneath the surface. Women shouted in panic. Then suddenly Ada grabbed the child's arm. She pulled him upward and fought through the current with all her strength. Minutes later, she dragged the coffin boy safely onto the riverbank. The child's mother collapsed beside him crying. "My son." The villagers stared at Ada in shock. Her dress clung heavily to her body. Her breathing was uneven. But her first concern was the little boy. "Is he all right?" she asked softly. The boy's mother nodded through tears. "You saved him." For the first time in years, someone looked at Ada with gratitude instead of disgust. But before the moment could last, Mom Nkechi appeared. And she was furious. "You useless girl," she screamed. She slapped Ada hard across the face. The villagers gasped. "You abandoned the buckets. You wasted my time." Ada lowered her head. "I was trying to save." "Silence." Mom Nkechi grabbed her roughly by the arm. "You embarrass me everywhere we go." The little boy's mother stepped forward nervously. "Please," she saved my child. But Mama Nkechi only scoffed. "Then take her with you if she is so precious." She dragged Ada away while villagers watched in uncomfortable silence. That night, Mama Nkechi refused to let Ada enter the house. "Sleep outside," she said coldly. "Maybe the rain will teach you obedience." Ada sat beneath the small roof outside the hut while storm clouds gathered again. Her stomach was empty. Her cheeks still burned from the slap. Yet somehow the pain inside her heart hurt more. She looked toward the dark sky. "Mama. Papa," she whispered. Tears rolled slowly down her face. "Did I do something wrong?" The wind answered with silence. Hours passed. Then suddenly, the sound of horses echoed through the village. Ada looked up in confusion. Several royal guards rode through the muddy road carrying torches. Behind them came a magnificent black carriage marked with the golden symbol of the kingdom. Villagers rushed outside their homes in shock. Royal visitors almost never came to Akambi village. The carriage stopped near the village center. A tall young man stepped out. He wore a dark royal coat lined with gold. His posture was calm but powerful. And although rain poured heavily around him, he seemed completely unaffected. The villagers immediately bowed. "Your Highness," they whispered. Ada froze. "The prince." Prince stunned. She had only heard stories about him. Some said he was kind. Others said he hated dishonesty. Many claimed he secretly traveled across the kingdom to understand how ordinary people lived. But Ada never imagined she would see him with her own eyes. Prince Tan slowly looked around the village. Then his eyes stopped on her. Ada quickly lowered her gaze. She was soaked from rain. Her clothes were old. Her feet were bare. She looked nothing like someone worthy of a prince's attention. Yet Tan continued staring. Not with disgust. Not with pity. But with curiosity. One of the guards approached Mama Nkechi. "His Highness requests shelter for the night," he announced. Mama Nkechi immediately forced a fake smile. "Of course. Of course. My home would be honored." She quickly pushed Ada further into the shadows, embarrassed by her appearance. Inside the hut, Mama Nkechi ordered Ada to stay hidden in the kitchen. "Do not embarrass me in front of royalty," she hissed. Ada quietly obeyed. As the prince entered the small house, Mama Nkechi suddenly acted like a completely different person. Her voice became sweet. Her daughters pretended to be elegant. Everyone smiled. Everyone lied. Ada watched silently from behind the kitchen doorway. Prince Tan sat calmly while servants unpacked supplies. Then suddenly his eyes moved toward the kitchen. Toward her. Their eyes met for one brief second. Ada immediately looked away. But something strange happened. The prince smiled. Not a mocking smile. A gentle one. Later that night, after dinner, Tan quietly stepped outside for fresh air. As he walked behind the hut, he noticed a weak light near the firewood area. Ada sat alone beside a tiny fire trying to dry her wet clothes. She did not notice him at first. She was softly singing an old lullaby her mother used to sing. The sadness in her voice stopped Tan completely. "You should not stay outside in this weather," he said gently. Ada gasped and quickly stood up. "Why, Your Highness?" She lowered her head immediately. "Forgive me." Tan studied her carefully. Even in torn clothes, there was something graceful about her. Something honest. Something painfully lonely. "What is your name?" he asked. "Ada." "Do you live here?" She hesitated. "Yes." The prince glanced toward the warm house. Then back at the cold fire beside her. He understood more than she said. For a moment, neither spoke. Rain tapped softly against the roof. Then Ton removed his royal cloak and gently placed it over her shoulders. Eda's eyes widened. "Your Highness, I cannot." "You are freezing," he said quietly. No one had shown her kindness in so long that the simple gesture nearly broke her heart. Tears filled her eyes before she could stop them. Ton noticed. And for the first time in many years, the future prince of the kingdom felt anger toward the cruelty hidden inside ordinary homes. He looked at Eda carefully. And deep inside his heart, something changed. Neither of them knew it yet. But this rainy night would become the beginning of a story the entire kingdom would one day remember forever. Morning arrived slowly over Akambi village. The heavy rain from the night before had finally stopped, leaving behind wet roads, dripping rooftops, and thick grey clouds hanging low across the sky. Inside Momankechi's hut, everyone moved around nervously. Royal guards stood outside. Servants carried polished boxes and supplies. The villagers whispered endlessly about the prince spending the night in their poor little village. But inside the kitchen, Ede quietly washed dishes as if nothing extraordinary had happened. Only her trembling hands revealed the truth. She could still feel the warmth of Prince Ton's cloak resting around her shoulders the night before. No one had ever treated her gently before. Not since her parents died. And somehow that simple kindness frightened her more than cruelty. Because kindness gave hope. And hope was dangerous. "Eda." Momankechi's sharp voice shattered her thoughts. "Why are you moving like a sick goat this morning? Hurry up." "Yes, Auntie," Eda answered softly. Momankechi stormed into the kitchen with irritation burning across her face. "The prince and his guards will eat before they leave. Everything must be perfect. Do you hear me?" Eda nodded. But before she could continue washing dishes, Momankechi suddenly noticed the royal cloak folded carefully beside the fire. Her eyes widened. Where did this come from? Eda froze. Momankechi grabbed the expensive cloak instantly. The golden stitching alone was worth more money than she had ever held in her life. "Did you steal this?" "No," Eda quickly cried. "The prince gave it to me because I was cold." For a moment, Momankechi simply stared. Then she laughed. Not with joy. With mockery. "The prince gave this to you?" She looked Eda up and down with disgust. "You truly think someone like him would notice a dirty orphan like you?" Eda lowered her eyes. Deep down, even she struggled to believe it. Momankechi quickly folded the cloak and hid it. "This belongs to the family now," she snapped. "You do not deserve royal gifts." Eda wanted to protest. But fear sealed her mouth shut. Outside, villagers gathered near the house hoping to catch another glimpse of the prince. Young women adjusted their dresses. Mothers pushed their daughters forward. Everyone dreamed of impressing royalty. Meanwhile, Prince Tan stood beside his horse speaking quietly with one of his guards. Although he appeared calm, his thoughts kept returning to the lonely girl he had found beside the fire. Something about Eda disturbed him deeply. Not because she was weak, but because she carried pain with unusual silence. Most people begged for sympathy. She did not. Most people complained loudly. She endured quietly. And somehow that made her unforgettable. "Your Highness," one guard said carefully. "The village chief has arrived to greet you." Prince Tan nodded politely. Chief Bamedil approached with a wide nervous smile. "We are honored by your visit, Your Highness." Tan greeted him respectfully. Then his eyes moved casually across the crowd. Searching. Looking for Eda. But she was nowhere outside. A strange disappointment settled inside him. Meanwhile, inside the kitchen, Eda prepared breakfast trays quietly. As she carried one tray toward the main room, she accidentally overheard Momankechi speaking to her daughters. "Stand properly when the prince looks at you," Momankechi whispered urgently. "Smile softly. Wealthy men hate stubborn women. Her daughters giggled. What if he chooses one of us? Mama Nkechi's eyes sparkled greedily. Then our suffering ends forever. Ada looked down silently. No one had ever spoken about her future that way. To Mama Nkechi, Ada was not family. She was labor. Nothing more. Ada entered carefully carrying the breakfast tray. The moment Prince Tom saw her, his expression softened slightly. Mama Nkechi noticed immediately. And panic flashed across her face. She quickly stepped between them. Forgive her, Your Highness, she laughed nervously. She is only a servant girl. Ada quietly placed the tray down. But before she could leave, Prince Tom spoke. Thank you, Ada. The room became silent. Mama Nkechi's daughters exchanged shocked looks. The prince remembered her name. Ada herself looked startled. Why you remember me? A faint smile appeared on Tom's face. Of course. Nobody had ever spoken to Ada with such warmth before. She quickly lowered her head and hurried away before anyone could notice the tears forming in her eyes. Mama Nkechi forced another fake laugh. Please forgive the girl. She is shy and uneducated. Prince Tom looked directly at her. Kindness matters more than education. Mama Nkechi's smile weakened. For the first time, she sensed danger. After breakfast, Prince Tom prepared to leave. Villagers lined the road excitedly. Children waved. Women smiled brightly. The royal guards mounted their horses. But just before entering his carriage, Tom suddenly turned toward Mama Nkechi. May I speak with Ada before I leave? The entire village fell silent. Mama Nkechi nearly choked. Ada. Yes. There was no anger in the prince's voice. But there was authority. No one dared refuse him. Mama Nkechi forced a trembling smile. Of course, Your Highness. Moments later, Ada stepped outside nervously. Villagers stared openly. Some looked confused. Others jealous. Ada kept her eyes lowered as she approached the prince. You wish to see me? Prince Tom studied her quietly. In daylight, the bruises on her hands were more visible. So were the signs of exhaustion. Did you eat this morning? He asked suddenly. Ada blinked in surprise. Yes. But the hesitation in her voice revealed the lie. Tom noticed immediately. Without another word, he handed her a small wrapped package. Take this. Ada opened it slowly. Inside were fresh fruits, bread, and small pieces of dried meat. Real food. Enough food for several days. Her eyes widened. Your Highness. I cannot accept this. You can, he replied gently. Mama Nkechi watched from behind with hidden fury. The villagers whispered louder. Prince Tom then lowered his voice. Ada, if you ever need help, come to the palace in Lagos City. Her heart nearly stopped. Nobody had ever offered her a place to run toward before. Only places to run from. She looked up carefully. For one brief second, their eyes met again. And in that moment, Ada felt something dangerous growing inside her chest. Hope. Prince Tom climbed into the carriage. The royal horses began moving. Villagers bowed as the prince departed. But even as the carriage disappeared down the muddy road, Ada remained frozen in place. Holding the food tightly against her chest. Watching the only person who had ever truly seen her disappear into the distance. That night, Mama Nkechi's cruelty worsened. You think you are special now, she hissed after the villagers left. Because the prince spoke to you twice? Ada stayed silent. Which only made Mama Nkechi angrier. Listen carefully, she snapped. Girls like you do not marry princes. You scrub floors. You suffer quietly. That is your place in this world. Then she pointed toward the kitchen. Sleep there tonight. Ada obeyed without argument. But later, while lying beside the wick fire, she carefully opened the food package again. At the very bottom, hidden beneath the bread, she discovered something unexpected. A small royal coin. And a folded piece of paper. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside, written neatly in dark ink, were only a few words. No one deserves to live without kindness. Turned. Ada stared at the message for a very long time. Then tears slowly rolled down her cheeks. Not tears of pain. Tears of confusion. Because after years of darkness, someone had finally given her light. And she no longer knew what to do with it. Far away from Akambi village, Prince Ton sat silently inside his moving carriage. One of his guards noticed his unusual silence. "Your Highness, are you troubled?" Ton looked out the window thoughtfully. "Tell me," he said quietly. "Why do people ignore suffering when it happens directly in front of them?" The guard hesitated. "Sometimes people fear speaking against cruelty." Ton's jaw tightened. "Fear creates monsters." The carriage continued toward Lagos City. But Prince Ton's thoughts remained behind. With the quiet orphan girl whose eyes carried more sadness than anyone her age should know. Neither of them realized it yet. But powerful enemies had already begun noticing the prince's interest in Ada. And in the royal palace, some people would do anything to prevent a poor village girl from changing the future of the kingdom. 3 days passed after Prince Ton left Akambi village. But for Ada, it felt like an entirely different world had begun. Everything around her remained the same. The broken heart. The endless chores. The insults. The hunger. Yet inside her heart, something had quietly changed. Hope. Dangerous hope. Every night before sleeping beside the wick kitchen fire, she unfolded the small note Prince Ton had given her. "No one deserves to live without kindness." She read those words repeatedly until they no longer felt real. Sometimes she wondered if she had imagined everything. Why would a prince care about someone like her? Why would royalty notice a poor orphan girl everyone else ignored? But whenever doubt filled her mind, she remembered the way he looked at her. Not with pity. Not with superiority. But with humanity. And that memory refused to disappear. Unfortunately, Mama Nkechi had also noticed the growing change inside Ada. And she hated it. That morning, Ada carried heavy baskets toward the village market while Mama Nkechi walked behind her. "Walk faster," she snapped. The sun burned fiercely overhead. Sweat rolled down Ada's face. But she remained silent. As they reached the market, whispers immediately spread among the villagers. "That is the girl the prince spoke to. I heard he gave her gifts." Impossible. Maybe she used charms on him. The gossip grew louder every day. Some people suddenly acted nicer toward Ada. Others hated her even more. Jealousy moved quickly through poor communities. Mama Nkechi leaned close to Ada and whispered harshly. "Do not embarrass me today. Keep your eyes down and your mouth shut." Ada nodded. Hours passed slowly. She sold tomatoes, peppers, and cassava while rich women bargained aggressively over tiny prices. By afternoon, the market became crowded and noisy. Then suddenly, royal drums echoed from the road. Everyone froze. A royal messenger on horseback entered the market square carrying the symbol of the kingdom. Villagers immediately stepped aside. The messenger unrolled a scroll and announced loudly. By order of the royal palace, all villages will send representatives to Lagos City for the Festival of Unity next week. Excited murmurs spread everywhere. The Festival of Unity was the largest celebration in the kingdom. People traveled from distant regions. There would be dancing, royal ceremonies, music, food, and most importantly, the royal family would appear publicly. The messenger continued speaking. Each village may bring workers, traders, and servants to assist during the celebration. Mom Nkechi's eyes immediately brightened. Opportunities meant money. And money meant survival. After the messenger left, villagers began preparing excitedly. But as Ada packed the remaining vegetables, Mom Nkechi suddenly turned toward her. "You are coming with us to Lagos City," she said. Ada looked stunned. "Me? Do not look so excited," Mom Nkechi hissed. "You are only going to work. Royal visitors pay well for servants during festivals." Even so, Ada's heart raced. Lagos City. The palace. Prince stunned. For the first time in years, the world suddenly felt larger than suffering. That night, Ada could barely sleep. She had heard endless stories about Lagos City. Massive buildings. Golden streets. Powerful nobles. Luxury beyond imagination. A place completely different from her tiny forgotten village. But deep inside, another feeling disturbed her. Fear. Because somewhere in that enormous city lived the prince whose kindness had already begun changing her heart. And she did not know if seeing him again would heal her. Or destroy her completely. Meanwhile, far away in Lagos City, the royal palace glowed beneath hundreds of golden lights. Servants rushed through massive hallways carrying expensive fabrics and decorations for the upcoming festival. Musicians practiced. Royal guards patrolled every entrance. Everything appeared perfect. But beneath the palace's beauty, dangerous secrets quietly moved through the shadows. Inside a luxurious private chamber, Queen Moremi sat beside a tall window watching the city below. Her beauty remained striking despite her cold expression. Every movement she made carried elegance and authority. Beside her stood Lady Bisola, one of the royal advisors. "Your Majesty," Bisola said carefully. "The prince has returned from the villages." Queen Moremi nodded slowly. "And what did he discover this time?" Bisola hesitated. "There are rumors about a village girl." The queen's eyes narrowed slightly. "What kind of rumors?" The prince showed unusual concern toward her. Silence filled the room. Then Queen Moremi laughed softly. But there was no warmth in the sound. Ton has always been soft-hearted. Bisola stepped closer. "Some nobles are already discussing it." The queen's expression darkened. A future king cannot become distracted by poverty and emotions. She slowly stood. "Find out who this girl is." Meanwhile, Prince Ton stood alone on a palace balcony staring toward the distant city lights. His closest friend and royal guard, Connor, approached quietly. "You have been restless since returning," Connor observed. Ton remained silent for a moment. Then he spoke. "Have you ever looked at someone and realized the world has failed them completely?" Connor frowned slightly. "The village girl." Ton glanced at him. "You noticed?" Connor smiled faintly. "You spoke about her the entire journey home without realizing it." For the first time in days, Ton laughed softly. Then his expression became serious again. There was sadness in her eyes, Connor. Not ordinary sadness. The kind that comes from surviving too much for too long. Connor crossed his arms. "And now you cannot stop thinking about her." Ton looked away. He wanted to deny it. But he could not. Because somehow Ada's quiet suffering had followed him back into the palace. And no matter how luxurious his world appeared, it suddenly felt empty compared to the honesty he had seen in her. The next morning, preparations for the festival intensified. Servants from different villages began arriving at the palace. Cooks prepared enormous meals. Workers decorated giant halls with flowers and gold fabrics. Musicians rehearsed endlessly. Excitement spread throughout Lagos City. 3 days later, Ede finally arrived. The moment their wagon entered the city, she stared in complete amazement. Tall buildings surrounded the roads. Markets overflowed with colorful fabrics and jewelry. Music echoed through crowded streets. People moved everywhere. Rich nobles, street vendors, royal soldiers. Everything felt alive. Mama Nkechi quickly grabbed Ada's arm. "Stop staring like a village fool," she snapped. But Ada could not help it. For someone who had spent her life trapped inside pain and poverty, Lagos City looked almost magical. Eventually, they arrived at the royal palace. Ada's breath caught instantly. The palace was enormous. Golden towers rose toward the sky. Massive gates stood guarded by soldiers. Beautiful gardens stretched across the entrance. It looked like something from a dream, or a world she did not belong in. As servants entered through the side gates, Ada quietly carried baskets toward the kitchen area. But before she disappeared inside, something made her stop. She felt eyes on her. She turned slowly. And there he was. Prince Tan stood across the courtyard speaking with royal officials. For one frozen second, neither moved. The noise around them disappeared. Ada's heart pounded violently. Tan looked just as surprised. Then slowly, he smiled. Not like a prince greeting a servant. Like someone genuinely happy to see another person again. But before either of them could speak, a cold voice interrupted. "So this is the girl." Ada turned. Queen Moemi stood nearby surrounded by royal attendants. Her sharp eyes studied Ada carefully from head to toe. The warmth instantly vanished from the courtyard. Ada quickly lowered her head. "Why, Your Majesty?" Queen Moemi said nothing for several seconds. Then finally, "Interesting." The queen walked away gracefully. But the warning hidden inside her eyes remained. Prince Tan's expression darkened slightly. Because in that moment, he realized something dangerous. The palace had already noticed Ada. And once the royal family noticed someone, their life could change forever. For better. Or for worse. The royal palace never truly slept. Even during the deepest hours of the night, servants moved through endless hallways carrying trays, polishing golden decorations, and preparing for the grand festival of unity. But while the palace overflowed with celebration and music, Ada felt completely alone. 2 days had passed since her arrival in Lagos City. 2 days since Queen Marimi's cold eyes first landed on her. And somehow, everything around Ada had begun changing. The other servants whispered whenever she walked past. Some looked at her with curiosity. Others with jealousy. A few treated her kindly. But many had already heard the rumors. The prince had noticed the village girl. And in royal places, attention was dangerous. Especially for someone poor. Ada spent most of her time inside the palace kitchens preparing food for the festival guests. The work was exhausting. Huge pots boiled endlessly. Smoke filled the air. Cooks shouted constantly. Servants rushed everywhere carrying baskets of meat, rice, fruits, and spices. Yet strangely, Ada preferred the kitchen. Because inside the noise and chaos, people rarely paid attention to her. And invisibility had always been safer. That afternoon, Ada carried fresh bread toward the royal dining hall. As she carefully walked through one of the palace corridors, she suddenly heard footsteps behind her. Ada. Her heart nearly stopped. She turned quickly. Prince Tan stood there. Without royal guards. Without servants. Just him. Ada immediately lowered her eyes. "Your Highness." But Tan noticed the nervousness in her voice. "You do not need to sound afraid every time you speak to me," he said gently. Ada hesitated. "I am only trying to show respect." Tan smiled faintly. Respect and fear are not the same thing. For a moment, neither moved. Ada could feel her heartbeat racing. Being this close to him felt dangerous. Not because he frightened her, but because he made her feel something she had spent years trying to bury. "What?" Ton noticed the heavy tray in her hands. "You should not carry this alone," he said. Before Ada could protest, he lifted one side of the tray himself. Ada stared at him in shock. "Your Highness, please, people will see." "Then let them see," Ton replied calmly. Together they walked quietly through the corridor. For the first time in years, Ada felt strangely peaceful. No insults. No shouting. No cruelty. Just silence. Warm silence. But unfortunately, peace inside royal palaces never lasted long. At the far end of the corridor, Lady Bisola watched them carefully from behind the pillar. And her expression darkened instantly. Later that evening, Queen Moemi sat inside her private chamber while servants brushed her hair. Lady Bisola entered quietly. "Your Majesty," she said softly. "The rumors are true." Queen Moemi looked at her reflection in the mirror. "Explain." "The prince spends time with the village girl whenever possible." Silence filled the room. Then slowly, the queen dismissed the servants. Once they were alone, her calm expression disappeared. "This cannot continue," she said coldly. Bisola nodded carefully. "People are beginning to notice." Queen Moemi stood. The royal council already pressures Ton to marry Lady Adaronk next year. Lady Adaronk, the daughter of the kingdom's most powerful noble family. Beautiful, educated, wealthy, and extremely ambitious. A perfect political marriage. Queen Moemi walked slowly toward the window. A future king cannot become emotionally attached to a servant girl. Bisola hesitated before speaking. "What should we do?" The queen's eyes hardened. "Remove her quietly before this becomes a scandal." Meanwhile, Ada sat alone behind the kitchen courtyard later that night eating leftover bread. The moonlight reflected softly across the palace gardens. For the first time in many years, she allowed herself to dream. Not about becoming rich. Not about becoming royal. Just about a life where she no longer felt unwanted. Footsteps approached. Ada quickly stood. But her expression softened when she saw Ton again. The prince sat beside her without hesitation. "You hide here often," he observed. Ada smiled faintly. "Quiet places are easier." Ton looked toward the palace lights. "Sometimes I feel the same way." Ada looked surprised. "But you are a prince." Ton laughed softly. "Princes get lonely too." For the first time, Ada looked directly at him without fear. And suddenly she realized something. Despite the palace, the wealth, and the power, Ton carried loneliness inside him too. The realization made him feel more human. More real. They spoke quietly for nearly an hour. About childhood. About dreams. About fear. Ada found herself laughing softly at some of Ton's stories. A sound she barely recognized anymore. And Ton realized he had not felt this peaceful with anyone in years. But while they sat together beneath the moonlight, another pair of eyes watched from the shadows. Lady Adaronk. Her beautiful face twisted with fury. She had spent years expecting to become future queen. And now some poor village girl threatened everything. The next morning, disaster arrived. The palace exploded with panic after Queen Marimi's priceless royal necklace suddenly disappeared. Servants were lined up immediately. Royal guards searched rooms. Fear spread everywhere. Inside the main hall, Queen Moemi stood with controlled anger. "No one leaves this palace until the necklace is found," she announced. Ada stood nervously among the servants. Her stomach tightened painfully. She hated conflict. Hated attention. Then suddenly, one royal guard stepped forward. "Your Majesty, we found this." He held up a small cloth bag. Ada froze. It was hers. The guard opened it. Inside lay the missing royal necklace. Gasps filled the hall. Ada's face lost all color. No. Mama Nkechi immediately stepped away from her. I knew this girl would bring disgrace. The servants began whispering loudly. She stole from the queen. A thief. Village people are always greedy. Ada shook violently. I did not steal it, she whispered. But nobody listened. Queen Marimi's expression remained unreadable. Search her room, she ordered. Royal guards immediately dragged Ada toward the servants' quarters. Ton arrived moments later after hearing the commotion. What happened? Lady Bisola answered quickly. The girl stole the queen's necklace. Ton's eyes widened. That is impossible. But before he could argue further, guards returned carrying additional jewelry hidden beneath Ada's sleeping mat. The crowd erupted. Ada stared in horror. She had never seen those items before. Someone planted them. She knew it instantly. But fear crushed her voice. Queen Moemi turned toward Ton calmly. You see now why emotions cloud judgment. Ton looked at Ada. Tears filled her eyes. But more painful than fear was the heartbreak written across her face. Because for the first time since meeting him, she realized his word could destroy her. I did not do this, she whispered desperately. Ton stepped forward. I believe her. The hall fell silent. Queen Marimi's eyes hardened slightly. The evidence says otherwise. Evidence can be manipulated, Ton replied sharply. The tension became unbearable. No one spoke. No one moved. Finally, Queen Moemi lifted her chin. Until the investigation is complete, the girl will remain confined. Ada felt her knees weaken. Royal guards grabbed her arms. Please, she whispered. I swear I'm innocent. But the guards dragged her away. As Ada disappeared down the hallway, she looked back one final time. At turned. And the pain inside her eyes shattered something inside him. Because despite all his power, he had failed to protect her. That night, Ada sat alone inside a tiny log servant room. No windows. No comfort. Only darkness. Tears rolled silently down her face. Not because of the accusation, but because deep down, she finally understood a cruel truth. No matter how kind Prince Ton was, the palace would never allow someone like her to survive peacefully. And somewhere outside that locked room, powerful people were already planning how to erase her from the prince's life forever.